said, I'm going to talk about the process of doing code review in an IDE. JetBrains makes Upsource, which is a code review tool, but we're going to have a little bit of a look at Upsource as a code review tool, but we're going to look more about how we as developers are going to do the code review process through using something like IntelliJ IDEA. Before I do that, I wanted to take a quick look at Upsource itself, though, and before we plunge straight into the IDE. So let's give a quick overview to Upsource. So Upsource is a code review tool produced by JetBrains, and it also allows you to browse code, browse your repositories, and take a look at what's going on inside your code base. Here, for example, this is the web UI. You can see the projects I've got loaded into my Upsource instance. If I look at a specific project, then I can see all the commits that are in that project. I can see the different branches. I can see the code with just this commit. I also have code reviews like this one, which are associated with a specific, I can do branch level code reviews. I can do individual commit level code reviews. I can see the news and events that happens down the right-hand side here, so accepted, things like that. If I look at a specific review, let's try and take a quick look at this one. Obviously, what I expect to be able to see up this review, if I had more than one commit, I'd be able to see multiple commits up at the top. I haven't assigned a reviewer to this review, so let's go ahead and do that. Just add this reviewer. Upsource suggests a reviewer for this review based on the code that's being reviewed, based on who's reviewed my commits in the past. I can see things like the comments which are in this review, whether they're a review level comment or a comment on a particular class. So here I'm doing Java because I'm a Java developer, but as Maria said, this is not necessarily specific to just Java. So if I look at one of the files, then I can see the code which went into this commit. I can see the comment that an author has put on here. I can even see things like IntelliJ inspections that may have failed as a result of this commit. So here I can see new warnings got introduced. I can also do things like label these comments. I can say this is a particular explanation rather than raising a bug or a defect or something like that. What else? The other nice thing about Upsource is that obviously loads of code review tools let you have effectively a side-by-side diff or an inline diff, and you use that to navigate through the files in a particular commit or a series of commits, and you look at the diff to see to get a feel for what changes were implemented and whether this was a good thing to do or not. And that's fine. Upsource goes a little bit further in that I can also do things like I can find usages of a specific class, the same way you would kind of use that perhaps inside an IDE. So I can see which files use this particular class. I can do things like I can drill in, go to declaration of classes and so forth. So I can do some navigation here in Upsource, which I can't normally do inside a diff viewer. So that's all well and good, but what we talked about is doing, or we want to talk about, is doing a code review in an IDE. So while the web UI provides an IDE-like experience, it's really not the same as actually using something like IntelliJ IDEA to do your code review. Now, as developers, we like to live inside our IDE. We're familiar with the IDE. We know the shortcuts. We know how to sort of see the code and navigate the code inside an IDE. So although a web UI can try and give us that kind of experience, the best way to get that experience is actually through the IDE. Now, normally you can do this through other tools. You can do things like downloading patches or switching to various branches, obviously. So it's not a new idea to do code review through the IDE. But what Upsource offers you is the ability to use the Upsource plugin to do this. So the Upsource plugin lets you use IntelliJ IDEA, connect directly to your Upsource server, and perform your code reviews from within IntelliJ IDEA. You don't need to go to the web user interface at all. So firstly, let's take a look at some of the basic settings. So this is the boring setup stuff, if you like. Let's see where you get the plugin from. Inside our settings, we're going to go to install the JetBrains plugin, and this is where we will find the Upsource plugin. Now, obviously, I've already got this installed, so I don't need to install it, thank goodness. Otherwise, I'd have to install it, download it, and restart. But that's where you want to go and find your Upsource plugin. And once you've got it installed, here you can see it in my list of plugins here. Now I can configure it from inside the IDE as well. So let's find those settings. Here I've got Tools, Upsource Connection, and here's where I put the link to my Upsource server. So this is my local server. And I can also, there are other settings in here, so just not only a couple, but there's a couple of other Upsource settings here. So it's really quite simple to install the Upsource plugin, point it to the right server, and away we go. What you'll find is, let me just dismiss this notification, because one of the things the Upsource plugin gives you is notifications that are applicable to you. What you'll find is down here, this Upsource button here, you can see which project you're connected with. So I have the Sense codebase checked out, which corresponds to my Sense Upsource project. And the plugin will make a really good guess as to which Upsource project corresponds to your code. If you have a slightly more complicated arrangement whereby perhaps you have a fork or a couple of different implementations of the same project, then you can always tell the plugin which one that you're looking at. And that's done with these settings down here. So that's kind of the boring details of how to get the plugin up and running. Let me just make sure I've covered everything I wanted to do. Okay, so next up, what's kind of much more interesting is the use case of an actual code review workflow from inside the IDE. Now here I have to fake it slightly, well not really fake it, but I have to show you two sides of the coin on a single computer. Now normally a code review of course is made up of at least two parties. One is the code author, the other is the code reviewer. Often inside even small projects you have more than one reviewer, you might have multiple watchers. So what I've done is I've got two instances of IntelliJ IDEA set up. One is with this dark background. This is me from the point of view of the code author. And then I have a lighter one here. This is me from the point of view of the reviewer. I'm going to try and make this as little confusing as possible, but I just want to get that clear up front that we do have two personas, someone who's implementing the code changes, who's making changes to the review, and someone who's reviewing those changes. So let's go right ahead and commit some changes and package it up into a code review and ask for a review. So what I've done is I've made some changes to a number of files, and obviously I'm going to want to commit those files. And let's have a look for a message that I want to use. So I'm going to commit this. I can use this to say review it with Upsource, and I want to create a brand new review. So that's all I have to do is I just have to tick this. I'm going to commit and push. And that will push the changes to my server. And I can change the title of my code review. I don't know, new feature, card, whatever the idea of the feature is. Obviously, I should really be adding a reviewer, so from here I can add a reviewer. I have a list of all the reviewers available for this project. For the sake of simplicity here, I only have 3 reviewers. So let's add reviewer as my reviewer. Let's go ahead with that. So the code has been successfully pushed, and as the code author, I can see what this code review looks like inside the Upsource plugin reviews window here inside the IDE. Now, from my point of view as the author, I'm probably fine now. I've done this. I've committed my changes. I've packaged it as a code review. So now I'm going to flick to the point of view of the reviewer. So here I am, I'm the reviewer. I also have the Upsource plugin installed and running. And you can see the notification that says that I've been added as a reviewer to this new code review. So if I click on this, it opens up my reviews window. And Let's first look at this. The reviews window gives us a list of all the reviews that I can look at. In this particular case, I've got all of the code reviews that I should be reviewing selected, but I can obviously look at all of the ones where I've authored them, all reviews altogether, and so on and so forth. So here is a list of all the things that I should be code reviewing. Now, just as a slight aside, if you've got a lot of code reviews kind of pending, waiting for you, it's probably a good idea to sit down and try and clear some of those, because someone's probably going to be very peeved at you for not having reviewed their code. So it would be good if this isn't super long list of code reviews that need you. So you can tell the difference here that these are code reviews with individual commits associated with them. This is a code review which is associated with a branch. And branch reviews, every time you add a commit to that branch, the commit will automatically get added to that branch review. The example I'm going to look at is a single code review where you manually add commits to it. But I think that if you're doing things like feature branching, branch reviews are going to be a much more natural way of working. So now let's take a look at this review that we've just created. You can see that the code author is here. This is me, the reviewer. I only have a single commit in this code review, and here are all the files that make up that commit. And the ones in bold are the ones that I haven't looked at yet. Now, obviously, this is a brand new code review, so I haven't looked at any of these yet. I can also do things like I can also edit the review if I want. I can edit the title. I can add more reviewers. I can add watchers, and so forth. So what I want to do, obviously, is I want to have a quick look at these changes. So if I double click on here, I get the diff view, so I can see what changes went in as part of this review. So I can see I have some body of some method here. I have some code added in here, and then I have some XML changes. Now, as the reviewer, I'm going to look at this, and in this particular example, a couple of things jump out at me. One, I've got unused imports here, so I can use this leave a comment, which is an Upsource comment, on the code in this diff view. So I might say something like, please remove unused imports. Now I can see that there's a comment associated with this line in the code. And if I look at this, I can see the line that it applies to is highlighted here. So that's fine. And I might also look at this other comment here. But we'll look at that in a minute. So this is the diff views, kind of standard side-by-side view. I can add comments. I can take a look at what's going on here. But what I might want to do is I might want to look at this inside as a whole rather than as a diff view. So I'll open the review version of this class. So now I can look at it like I normally would look at a piece of code, and I can look at it as a whole. And when I look at it like this, then I might notice that, oh yeah, actually, this really ought to be a Lambda expression or a method reference. So here, I might want to add a comment here. Let's add a comment to the whole in a class. I can say Upsource, leave a comment, or use the shortcut of Control, Alt, and Slash. And here I can either address the comment directly to the author or just leave a general comment which says something like, please use Java 8 idioms. Now when I leave this comment, I can attach it to the review, which is the review that I'm looking at. Or what I could do, which we might have a look at later, is choose to not attach it to a review, but just have it attached to the code so that people who look at this code later can have a look at this comment. And we'll look at an example of this in a minute. So let's attach that to the review. And again, you can see the comments. You can see in the gutter here, you can see a comment icon, and then I can look at these comments here, and the same up here. If I expand this, I should be able to see it highlighted. So as I'm looking at this code, I can be making comments for the code. What I did though is I effectively just got a read-only copy of just this class. So if I start drilling through and using the IDE like I expect to, then when I drill through here, I'll get my current version of this file, not the version of the file that's part of this code review. So what I really want to do when I want to have a more thorough look at what classes were impacted, how they work, then probably what I would want to do is check out this revision. So check out all the files that make up this code review. Okay, before I can do that, I'm just going to do a quick fetch from Git to make sure it's got the most up-to-date information. And now I should be able to check out this revision. Smart checkout. But what you saw is I had a collision there between the files that need to be checked out, and I have a local copy of that file already edited, so I can decide whether I want to take the version that's in the code review or the version that I have, or get IntelliJ to try and do something clever around that. Now, in actual fact, because I had a clash with this file here, misc.xml, I might decide that I want to write a comment on the code review related to this particular problem. So here in the code review, I can see the discussions. These are the ones we added, which apply specifically to dashboard.java. But I can actually add a new discussion item, which is a code review level discussion, so not tied to a specific file. So I might want to say something like, please don't check in misc.xml, and leave that there. So what we've done so far, all right, so if we go back to, not the diff, if we, that when I checked out this revision, what I got was the updated version of this happiness chart data file with the methods which came in as part of this revision. So now I can do things like, if I go back to dashboard, I can do all of my clicking through, navigating. I can run tests associated with this. So I have all the changes which are part of the code review, and I can look at them the way that I as a developer would normally look at code. So I can navigate through, I can run tests, I can start messing around with it. Now, one of the things we saw on dashboard was that there were unused imports. So I want to take a closer look at this. It turns out that actually when you're looking at this code in its entirety, these imports aren't unused, so which is a bit weird. So what I will want to do is I see that this is actually not a valid comment, so I'm going to remove this comment from the code review. And what I might want to do instead is say something like, I'm going to leave a comment. I'm not going to attach it to the review because I don't think this is something which is to do with a specific review. I'm going to leave a comment which says something like, there's something weird with the build. It thinks these are unused. So I leave that as a comment on this code, generally speaking. It's not attached to the review. So the next time someone comes and looks at this class, they'll be able to see that comment and go, oh, okay, I know about the build. Maybe I'll take a look at trying to fix that. Or the next time someone else changes this file and commits it into Upsource, when the next reviewer comes along and looks at the fact that these are supposedly unused imports, they'll see my comment and realize that they're not unused imports, that something else needs to be changed to fix this problem. So I've been doing the review. I have come up with a couple of things I want the person to address. Mostly I've really got this area which I think that the author needs to fix this before I'm really going to sign off on the review. So when I go back to the review level here, let's hide those discussions, I don't need them. I'm going to say that I really want the author to do something about these before I sign off on the review. So I'm going to say raise concern. It's not. So the idea about a code review is that you do it iteratively. So it's okay to raise a concern. It's okay to say to the author, well, you know, I'm overall pretty happy with what you did, but I really want you to address these 1 or 2 points before I sign off on it. It's not like an overall rejection of the overall architecture or the idea or whatever. It's just saying, look, I'm not going to sign off on it until these other things have been done. So I'm going to say raise concern for this. And then when this pops up again, you'll see that the reviewer has been set to raise concern. Okay, so now when I go back to being the code author, I get the notification saying that the reviewer has reviewed my code review, but they've raised a concern about the changes. And I can see all the things that happened on that review. So let's open up that review. I can see there's a discussion on here. So actually, I'm already looking at this file. So let's have a look at the discussion. Here I can see what that is. Okay, so I should use Java 8 idioms here. Let's move this so we can see it. I shall ask IntelliJ nicely to fix my code for me, replace with a method reference. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to respond to this particular issue, and I'm going to say done. What I could do, of course, is I could get into a discussion here. I could say, oh, I didn't think we were using Java 8 in this project, or actually, I'm halfway through some sort of refactoring, so I'll come back to that later. But in this particular case, what I wanted to say was, oh, thanks very much for your feedback. I've made that change. So now I've made that change. What I want to do is I want to commit that change. And I want to attach this new change to the review that I'm working on. So that was 17. So let's say using Java 8 idioms. Commit and push. So now I took my feedback from this code review. I made the changes which are appropriate for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that as resolved because I think I fixed that issue. Now, if I switch back to the reviewer, well, that's my reply to their comment. It's going to take a few seconds just for Upsource to poll the server to see if any changes are there. And then you can see that the changes come through. Now, at this point, I just want to take a quick moment to talk about different ways that you can add new commits to a code review. Here, what we saw is we use the IDE, we use the plugin in the IDE to attach a new commit to a specific code review. Other ways that you can do it is you can add into your commit message the ID of the code review, and it will automatically be connected to that code review. You can, of course, be committing to a branch which has already got a branch code review, in which case it will automatically get added to that. And you can also do it through the Upsource UI, through the web app, if you want to manually add particular commits to a code review. So now what we see is we see that this has gone away. Hold on a second. I think I've confused the IDE by having multiple instances open. So now I want to look at just this commit, this most recent commit, because I've already looked at the others. In fact, I can see that actually there's some changes on just one file that I really need to care about. The other files are not in bold, so I don't need to worry about them anymore. So I'm going to only look at the most recent commit, and I want to have a look at what changes went in here. And I can see that what happened was the author did what I reference here. In this case, I would have resolved my comment here, but if they hadn't, I could resolve that comment and say, okay, I'm happy, that's what we agreed. Now, given that's the only change that went in, and given that there were no other things which I really needed the code reviewer to deal with, I can just go ahead and say, accept these changes. and I'm happy with this review. So that's kind of the basic, well, a standard basic workflow for dealing with code reviews through the IDE. And you see that although if I wanted to, I could have gone to the Upsource UI to have a look at any of these reviews or to have a look at the news, the notifications, but I don't need to leave the IDE. I get notifications telling me of things that I need to do. I can switch between the files which are in the review and the versions which are in the review much faster than perhaps getting pull requests from someone or getting patches from someone. And so I can respond to changes quite quickly. It makes it a lot easier for us to have this backwards and forwards between the reviewer and the author and make the changes that are needed. So there are a couple of other things I want to have a look at. We've covered most of the features that will be needed as part of the normal workflow. So there's just a couple of other things which I think are interesting, certainly from the IDE point of view. One of the things that I think is quite nice is not only can I add comments on my code, but I could also take a look at a specific piece of code. Let's say I've got some notification here, and I might want to label, or I might want to bring someone's attention to this piece of code. I don't want to go so far as adding a comment on this line of code for someone to stumble over at some point. I might want to specifically point someone to this and say, let's do something about that. So here I go to Upsource. I can say get link to selection and copy that to the clipboard. I might then paste that in a chat window to someone and say, dude, what's this about? Or is there something I can do to help here? Or if you're discussing a particular design, you can be like, okay, in this area, this is what we do, and in another area, we can do something else. So let's have a look at what this looks like. If I paste this link, then it takes me to the Upsource IDE, the Upsource UI, and it loads up that class file that we were particularly looking at, and it will, my poor laptop is overheating, it will highlight the specific lines of code which we're interested in. So this allows us to have concrete discussions about code, even if we're not next to each other. It's really good in particular for remote working. So I can be saying, look, I'm talking about this code here or this code here, or I can use it perhaps to paste links to this code on a wiki when we're saying, oh, this is an example of really good code, or this is an example of code that we're trying to migrate away from. So we can link to specific pieces of code and have discussions about it. And one of the other things I didn't really talk about in terms of the IDE, we saw the notifications coming up here, and we saw that we can look at the discussions on a particular review, but we can also let me just move the GoToWebinar thing out of the way. We can also have a look at the news feed for a particular project. So I can see not just things which are about a specific review, I can see all of the news which is applicable to me, so people who've added me to a review or messages that I've had. And I can have a look at this and click on various things and check if that's interesting to me. So that was just covering some of the additional plugin features. There's one more area which I think is particularly interesting, probably because I do open source development on GitHub, but Upsource has GitHub integration. So instead of having to manage all my pull requests through the GitHub UI, I can manage them through the Upsource UI, of course, or I can manage them through the IDE. Let me show you an example of this. So here I have an open source project which is available on GitHub, and all the commits and all the branches as you'd expect to see. But you can also see that requests are associated with a code review, and I can assign a reviewer to these code reviews, or I can just use them to take a look. And so then if I have a look at this code review, I can use Upsource, whether in the UI or in the IDE like we just looked at. I can use Upsource to read comments and discussions, obviously, but look at the files which were changed. So if I have a look at this in the IDE, this allows me to look at, particularly when it comes to big pull requests with a number of different commits, I can have a look at what that's made up of. I can look at these specific files. I can navigate through in the IDE in a way which is much more natural to me, is much more kind of what I'm used to seeing. So manage pull requests, make comments on it inside a web UI, I can decide inside my IDE, which just makes my life a lot easier. So we've talked a lot about how Upsource provides integration to IntelliJ IDEA and how you can do your code reviews inside the IDE. I guess one of the questions I would have if I was looking at this would be, okay, what do I need the Upsource UI for? There are things that perhaps I would be doing in the web UI that I wouldn't necessarily do in the IDE. So the answer to that really is anything which is kind of beyond project level, or perhaps it's kind of project level over time rather than a specific commit or a specific code review. That's where you're perhaps going to be using the Upsource UI rather than your IDE specifically. So I'll give you some examples. Inside Upsource for a particular project, we have the same features that we were talking about before in terms of things like newsfeed, but I can do things like I can search the revisions for things that I'm particularly interested in, which doesn't occur. Let's have a look for geo, for example. I can look for commits which conform to whatever it is I'm searching for, a specific revision, so I can look at a specific revision and browse code in a particular revision to check it out into my changes that made up this revision. So that's quite useful, particularly for older pieces of code where you're trying to figure out what happened in a particular branch or a particular commit. I can also do navigation to a particular symbol like you'd expect to be able to do in the IDE. So let's have a look for mapped class, for example. I can navigate to that file, and then I can look at these files at any point in time, including its history, inside the Upsource IDE. And this will kind of let me navigate through the code base, including over time, quite easily. The other thing that's kind of interesting, and in fact I ended up using it myself today because I found it more readable, is that you can have a look at the branches in a particular project. So then I can see which branches there are. I can select a branch, perhaps these pull requests, and I can look at which commits make up this. So then see that what's there. And the other thing that the offers that isn't available in the IDE is you can see analytics on a particular project. Now this is an area that I think that could offer a lot of very interesting insights, and definitely an area that we're interested in expanding. You can see things like commit activity, who committed what and when, how active a particular project is. You can look at things like the sort of makeup of a particular project by file type and so forth. You can look at file history, which will tell you, it gives you an idea of which files are edited most frequently, how old they are, and perhaps point you to areas that could be improved, areas of tech debt that might be addressed that might make your code reviews in the future much easier. So here, when that's finished going through, we can see what these files represent. When I hover over it, it should give me a file name. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so this is probably a file that, given it's had 274 edits and it's a very long-lived file, we should probably look at maybe splitting this up into something which has got separation of concerns, separate dependencies. And of course, we get some analytics on the code review, who did which code reviews, when and where, who's been assigned to what. In this particular case, we won't see that much that's very interesting because we haven't been using this for code review very much on this particular project. So I think that's the basics of really what I wanted to cover. There are plenty of opportunities to show you other bits and pieces that might be interesting to you. So I think now would be a really good time to cover any of the questions that maybe haven't been answered or would be better answered with a demonstration through sharing my screen. Maria, anything we want to cover?
We have almost all the questions answered, except for there's this one I personally find a bit too complicated for me, so maybe you could answer that. So how is the workflow different if you're using forks? For example, each developer forks the project, perhaps works on a branch that they create for a feature, commits and pushes the code to that branch, then creates a pull request to commit the code back to shared repo.
Okay.
A little
yeah, that's a good question, and actually I'm glad that that's been asked because I do have an example of this. So this is exactly how I used to work on one of these projects. So what I've done, if we have a look at Upsource here, I actually have, so Morphia is the sort of the master version of this, which is run by, is owned by MongoDB, and then I have my own fork of this. So there are a number of different ways that you might manage a workflow using this, and it might be that you don't want to go so far as to create your own branch, commit it to your fork, and then create a pull request onto the master repo. You might want to do something like commit something on a branch on your fork, and then perhaps get it reviewed at that stage before going any further, because when you start merging up to the main repo, of course it has to be more, well, you tend to think it has to be more perfect, and it'd be nice to get feedback well before it gets to that stage. So the way that I managed it in my particular case is I've run this as multiple different projects. So we have a project for the master repo, and that's the one that we were looking at here. And that includes things like all of the pull requests which come through from the public here. So I can look at the master repo inside this Upsource project here. But when it comes to my fork, I have a separate Upsource project for my fork. And I can also create pull requests, not pull requests, I can create code reviews here. So I might perhaps ask someone to look at this, to look at the code I've submitted in the code review on my fork before even creating a pull request for the master repo. So this is just one of the workflows that I think might work. This is not the only way, of course, but it does let you create pull requests, code reviews on you without having to go so far as create a pull request on the master repo. So my answer was to have an individual Upsource project for each of the repositories that you're interested in. Obviously, if you've got a team of, well, if you've got a team of like 100 people, you might have 100 different repos to manage. If it's a smaller team of half a dozen people, maybe that's much more manageable.
Another question is, what about continuous integration? We do have a build status endpoint. Can you talk about that?
I can. I'm trying to remember which project I have that on. I think on, let me have a look at another one of these Morphia projects. So what we have is Upsource can be told where the continuous integration server is, and Upsource will flag each commit with whether it passed or failed in the continuous integration environment. This is running on my local laptop, so I only set this up for a couple of my reviews, and I can't. Hold on a second. And I don't have TeamCity in your commit, and a little green icon if TeamCity, for example, passed its builds for that commit. So you'll be able to see for this revision, did it go through continuous integration? Of course, if it failed, then you don't have to worry about doing any code reviews for it, because really it needs to pass before you start reviewing that code.
Another question, would it be possible to review a whole branch? For example, if I have a branch feature, blah, 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 and see all changed files compared to master?
Yes, absolutely. So let me find a branch review. So here I've got quite a long running review. Let's have a look at it in You can see I have a lot of revisions in this branch review. Let's say show all. I have a whole bunch of revisions which make up this branch. I've got them all in this review, and this review ends up being quite large. There are a number of different files. Review, and you can see obviously all these revisions getting or something I've idea inspections to say whether you've introduced or fixed errors as you went along. So this particular set of commits fixed 9 issues and introduced 27 more issues. And this is quite a nice summary, so you can sort of say, oh, this is a bit dodgy. Perhaps if we shouldn't be introducing more issues than we're fixing. So big long branch review. If I open this up inside my IDE, this was number 2, which I now can't find. SNS CR2. Ah, yes. So I can see all the individual commits that made up this review. I can see, by default, I see all the files that were changed at any point during this review. So I can see this got, I want to say that got added, but I'm red-green colorblind, so I can't tell if that's red or green. I can see things like renames and so on and so forth. If I want, I can say, okay, I only want to look at the most recent commit, which I can see only had 1 file in there, or I want to have a look at the whole branch, all the changes that went in there, and then I can see all of that here. And obviously, if I can say check out revisions, and that will check out everything up to this most recent version. Or if I know which branch it was, then obviously I can just check out the branch. So the branch was, if we look at this, sorry, here it says it's Java 8 Upsource blog 2, so I can actually just I can check out that branch. So Java 8 Upsource blog 2. I can just check out the branch, which might be an easier way of doing a branch review. And then I can go through and do what I was doing before. So I can have a look at the source files that make up this dual commit. I hope that kind of gives you an idea. Like a code review is very much, the code review process is very much dependent on what works best for the team. So I hope I've given you an idea of the visibility of things like branch reviews, but you can kind of decide for yourself how you really want to go through that whole process. For me, I think a branch review with, I don't know what's on there, like 24 commits is probably quite a big code review. So it's quite a lot of changes, and you might decide that actually you want to do code reviews with far fewer changes in.
One more question. How do pull requests and code reviews work together in the workflow?
How do pull requests and code reviews work together in the workflow? So, oh yes, okay, so let's have a look at some of this GitHub integration then. Let's take a look at Morphia. Now, the integration between GitHub and Upsource works both ways. So in this particular project, which is tracking the Morphia master repo, I'm mostly just getting all of my information from GitHub. So all of these comments, all of these pull requests, all of this stuff comes directly from GitHub. So I don't really do anything through Upsource other than sort of consume those and take a look at it. So if you're kind of keeping an eye on a project, but you just kind of want to see what's going on, but you're not really contributing to it, which is the case for me on this project, then that's quite a good way of reading what's going on. But what's really more important, of course, is as a team, you're probably going to be wanting to have bi-directional communication. So in an open source project, you're probably going to be getting pull requests from people from the general public who aren't necessarily part of your review process, who probably are not going to be looking at Upsource. So you'll let those people submit pull requests, you'll let them comment on those pull requests through the GitHub UI, but you might respond to them through Upsource, whether it's through the IDE or through the Upsource plugin in the UI. So let's have a look at this one, for example. On this review, there's a couple of revisions which make up this review. And then there's a few comments which happen in here. Now, I might have made these comments inside looking at his pull request inside GitHub. He'll see my comment if they came as part of GitHub. He won't know that I'm using Upsource to do this process. But I can still be using Upsource to make these comments, whether it's through the UI or through the plugin. I can still be using Upsource to download these changes and to navigate through them in order to find things like here. I actually ran the build so I could see what the failures were, and the user was saying they couldn't do that because they didn't have the right copy of the build in order to run it to get the right error, but I could do that because I could download the right revision with all of the right changes from Upsource, run the build, tell him which tests failed. It's invisible to these end users that you're actually using Upsource, but as a tool, as a team, you can be using Upsource, and then I'm going to be getting the benefits of using the IDE to write my comments, to see these comments. So if I have a look at perhaps one of the files which is in here, let's have a look. If I look at that inside my IDE, what I'm trying to find is, let's get the right test here. I haven't assigned myself to this pull request, so that's why it's not popping up on my feed. Now, when I open this version, I should, because the comments aren't on there, that's why. But if there were file level comments, I'd be able to see them on here as it would say discussion on there. Instead, all the discussions here are at the top level. They're to do with the code view itself. So I can be using my UI to respond to these particular points here. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. Our users can be using pull requests to submit pull requests. They can be using the GitHub UI to be having discussions, to be doing line level comments. And I can be using Upsource to get the right revisions, to look at it in the IDE, to comment on things in the IDE. And that's invisible to the users who are using GitHub pull requests. So the interaction works both ways.
There's a few questions unanswered, but I believe we're running out of time. So I would suggest that we will just post the answers to the questions that are left unanswered in the follow-up blog post together with the recording. There was a note about the quality of the audio as well, and yes, in the recording, audio should be perfect, so if you miss something, you may want to watch the recording.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and if you have any further questions, you can also send them to us. You can learn more about Upsource at JetBrains.com, and there are more videos at our YouTube channel about Upsource and all other tools. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thanks, bye.